Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
Hey, Katie, congratulations on your amazing marathon. How you feeling?
Oh, thanks so much, Jim. Yeah, we're a couple weeks out now. This will air probably 3 weeks after the marathon, and I'm feeling pretty good. I've been reflecting a lot on how marathon is hard, but it's maybe not as hard in terms of stimulus and recovery than Ironman. And so I've just been sort of cruising through the last couple of weeks. And I will say the one thing that stands out to me that's interesting is I don't really have a huge interest in let's get ready for our next races and do a bunch of hard stuff. Instead, I'm noodling around on my bike and hitting some trails and just enjoying that. But maybe that fire will be lit in a couple weeks and I'll be excited about later tries. And if not, we'll just ride some marathon fitness and see what happens and have some really fun sea races.
Well, we all know you. Your fire is always lit. It's just a matter of what degree it's lit.
Yeah, it's like a little match right now. It's just sort of smoldering at this time, but who knows? I mean, maybe I'll hit week 6 out for my next race and be like, let's lock in. So I'll keep everyone posted on that evolution.
But that's a good, we talk about that a lot too, right? Taking some time after, whether it's a recovery week or just after a big race and being well, just don't think like an athlete for a while. I feel like for me, it's the mental burden of waking up every day going, I've got to race, I got to do this thing. Just to have that off here. I don't know, how are you feeling? Just mentally, are you just relieved?
Yeah, I think I am. And I think what I've learned about myself is that I can only really have the A race mindset, separate from the training and the workouts, but I can only have that A race mindset for probably about 1 race per year. I think I've thought about this in the past with training really hard for Ironman Lake Placid and trying to get that Kona slot. It's really hard for me to then approach Kona just like I approached Lake Placid because I think we probably do underestimate how much pressure and stress we can just put on ourselves when we're getting ready for a really big race and a really big goal. And I don't think it's actually a good thing to operate under that level of stress all the time, where you're optimizing your entire life so that you could go to bed at 9 o'clock and wake up and do your big run and all that type of stuff. And these days I'm kind of I might stay out a little bit later and I might wake up and get brunch and I might decide what my workout is sometime later in the day. So I think that's all about balance and trying to figure out what that balance looks like for everybody. But if you're someone who feels like they need to have an A race mindset 100% of the time, then maybe that's sort of a window into some introspection about what we could do to take a little bit of that pressure off.
Right. Meanwhile, you're in the bar going make mine a double. I'm done with my marathon.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't necessarily endorse that as a performance enhancer, but if there's a time to do it, it's definitely after your A race.
So the question I want to ask about, I'm so fascinated with, the wall at mile, usually at mile 18 to 20. And I want to ask you about that. So how did you feel at mile 18 to 20 on your marathon? And how did you sort of train specifically to sort of address that issue?
Yeah, so everyone kind of has heard of the idea of hitting the wall, and generally it is something that happens around mile 20, where before you know it, you're running along, things seem fine, and then your legs just turn into lead and you can't keep going. And a lot of people, if you look at their marathon splits, you'll see something that's pretty consistent until kind of that 18, 19, 20, 21 mark. And so I will say I was nervous about that, especially because in my training, I'd done 3 20-milers, but I'd never gone longer than 20 miles. So I didn't really know what was going to happen in that 2021 neighborhood. But in my training, I think something that helped me was finishing those 20-milers and actually feeling okay, where if I had to, I could have kept going. And the way to still feel okay when you hit that point, I think all comes back to really good high carb fueling. So we've talked about that before, where if you're consistent with your fueling, you can kind of do amazing things in the context of marathon or Ironman or any other big endurance event. And I think for me, what I learned in the marathon process is that I don't think the wall is a thing if you have been fueling the entire time. I think a lot of people just aren't fueling enough during their entire marathon, and then they hit this point where they've been going too hard and they've completely run out of glycogen because they haven't been staying on top of it. So it might be a combination too of pushing too hard in threshold, but I think at the end of the day, if you're taking in enough fuel, there's nothing magic about that 20-mile mark. It can kind of happen anywhere. If you don't take in fuel from the first minute of the race, you might hit the wall at mile 10 or something. Or if you're a little bit under, maybe you hit it at mile 23. But yeah, for me, energy levels were pretty steady the entire time, and I kept my heart rate under threshold until I got to the end and slammed 70 grams of carbs per hour. And I forget if I mentioned this in the podcast last week or not, but I took in over 80 grams of carbs in the last 5 miles of this race, after mile 21 in the form of a couple of SIS beta fuels. And I think it was just because, I was I need to pull out all the stops right now because we're going to fall apart if we don't stay on top of it, but let's at least try. Train your gut to be able to do that. And I think you'll absolutely get through these really long events without worrying about the wall.
So that's our clickbait title is there is no marathon wall.
That's the hot take. There is no marathon wall if you're just fueling enough with SAS beta fuels. And we are not sponsored by them, but we highly recommend.
We're busting myths here. The
Yeah.
endurance drive. All right, so today we got a lot. We have another insights episode, and so much like this potpourri of endurance items here. What are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, so let's rapid fire all the things that we're going to talk about. I had a big event recently, but I also want to talk about your big event recently. So Jim is coming back from an amazing bike camp. You were in Mallorca, you were in Amsterdam. We're going to talk all about lessons from bike camp. Also on the bike theme, we're going to talk about thoughts on buying a new bike. I'm the proud owner of a new beautiful pink bicycle, and I'm obsessed with my bike. So we'll talk about that process. We've had a lot of lessons coming out of athletes who have recently done races. So we're going to talk about navigating race day uncontrollables with some stories from athletes. Also, some things related to impulse control in marathon racing. That's coming from another one of my athletes. We've got a little segment on post-race blues, which hits home for me recently, just the feelings surrounding finishing races. We're going to talk about GI issues on long runs, which came up in 6 athletes' training peaks over the weekend for me. So I don't know what is in the air or the water. And then my last one is troubleshooting low motivation fatigue, things that I'm asking my athletes. And then, Jim, you've got a couple others here. You want to read through what else we're going to cover?
Sure, yeah. So we'll talk about get more out of yourself with a race or doing some intervals with group training. Also want to talk a little bit more about some of the lessons I've learned recently about intervals and how intervals are this compressed learning environment. And if we have time, maybe we'll talk about a little bit about how and when to burn a match and what a match is in a race. And last thing we may talk about, we may not get to it, is skipping, because skipping is now having this social media moment. So maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't. But anyway, so where do we start?
Well, I think, Jim, I'm so excited about your bike camp. So why don't we start with that, talking about when and how to do a camp. Tell us what you've been up to in the last couple of weeks.
Okay, great. So yes, I went out to a sort of an impromptu bike camp with a couple of friends in Mallorca, and it was a 4-day trip. It was sort of an add-on trip to the other trip going to Amsterdam. Heard all about Mallorca, and here to report that it is all the rage. It is not underrated, shall we say? Yeah, it's an incredible place. Beautiful roads. There's just literally thousands and thousands of people there riding their bikes. The roads are really safe. The cars are very respectful, and it's clearly just set up as like a recreational paradise. Whether that's cycling, whether that's hiking, whether that's rock climbing, or any kind of water sports. Like I think Mallorca has it all. So my first recommendation is like go to Mallorca, spend some time there. But I went there and learned a few lessons, and maybe relearned most lessons because Katie, you and I have done some camps like this before, and training camps, bike camps, long bikes, and yeah, just really worth it. So the first thing is that you just get this huge bump in fitness with a training camp. And so I think I did about a week's worth of training stress score in about 3 to 4 days. The other thing too is that we get to focus on one sport, which will give you like a lot of confidence and skills. And so in this camp particularly, we did a ton of climbing, a ton of descending on these really scary sort of hairpin turns, which I'm not really used to being from New England. But by the end of the camp, like I was kind of downhilling, cornering pretty well and got better at it. And then also due to all the climbing, like my power balance, which is the left and right power, which I'm still rebuilding from last year's accident, just got a lot better. So it was really fun to just to go and just to focus on climbing and descending for 3 or 4 days. The other thing too was it's just great in a camp to focus on just being an athlete and not having any other life's responsibilities there. It's an adult play camp, right? You just get to go with your friends, you eat, you train, you eat, you train, and it's amazing what that'll do for me mentally. And again, because in that environment, you can really take a week's worth of stress and do it in 3 or 4 days under those kind of environments. And then the last thing was just it's this great, and this is my favorite part, is that you just build these new friendships or renew old friendships with people. So when you work hard with a group of people, you just really develop this quick feeling of camaraderie. And, in the past, I've kept in touch with people for many years after training camp because you get to know them really well. And sometimes you see them at other events around the world. And I always find it really interesting that, you could work with somebody in an office for like years and not really get to know them. But you show up at a training camp with a bunch of random people and suddenly within like 3 or 4 days, like, this is my new best friend, And a lot of it's just because you've just done hard work and suffering together and just sort of brings people together. So anyway, those are my first impressions of bike camp. But Katie, you've done camps before. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I love this. And I think camps are fantastic for a lot of the reasons that you just laid out. What I do want to underscore is that you don't necessarily have to go somewhere crazy to have a bike camp. Like we know people who have done incredible stay-at-home bike camps in the Upper Valley, for example. Or sometimes when I go out to California for work, like yes, it's for work, but I also treat it like a bike camp because I can go out and ride for 3 hours every day in February, which is really, really special. So think about ways, if you have a couple days off or even a long weekend, we've done some cool stuff where we're taking like a Friday through Monday and biking 100 miles every day for those 4 days. And that is a bike stimulus kind of unlike anything else. And I've been thinking about this actually in the context of switching from marathon training to tri training. I think one way to kind of bring my bike fitness up really fast would be to say, hey, let's just take a week and do major bike fitness even from home. And then I think you'll find that you just accelerate your fitness gains in that sport way faster than you would any other time. You could even say, hey, I'm having a swim camp and I'm going to swim 6 days a week for 3,500 to 4,000 yards, and you will probably come out of that being a way better swimmer. So it's awesome to go somewhere like America, and I want to hear more about your takeaways from that particular environment, but know that you can do this even if you live in like the Boston suburbs. There's ways to do a bike camp right there.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've had some friends now who, it's spring break for a lot of people right now for kids and people who are teachers and athletes, and they're taking their spring break and they're just like doing staycations and they're just biking a lot or running a lot. So, yeah, right. You don't have to go away to these really famous places. You can just stay at home and do it and you'll get the same effect. So, but I wanted to go through a little bit about what I learned on each day. So, day one, I think the first rule of day one is don't screw up day two and day three and day four. So really what that means is like, don't do anything too crazy because generally what happens, especially if you go away, if you stay at home, this is maybe not such a problem, but if you go away, travel to someplace, on day one, you're probably a little bit dehydrated, you're probably tired, you're maybe adjusting to time zones, so you're really just not feeling your best. So again, your job on day one is just not ruin the rest of the week. And so what that can mean is that, on this bike camp, like I was biking with some people that I kind of knew but didn't know, and there were some bike moves, later on in the day, and I was like, I'm gonna let those bike moves go and sort of put my ego aside because I'm just not feeling all that well. My heart rate was kind of up, and I thought, well, let's see how the rest of camp goes. But I'm not going to try to be a day one hero. And also on day one, I sort of made this mistake, which was I didn't eat enough on day one and suffered a little bit later in the day. So this is a good reminder, like even if you're in a new place, like you got to stay on top of your fueling. And part of that problem was that I was relying on somebody else who did the routes, and I didn't put the routes on my computer, which I should have, my bike computer, because then I didn't know when the big climbs were. I didn't know what the big descents were. I didn't really know, like, when are we stopping to get snacks? When are we stopping to get water? When are we stopping to get coffee? And so I loaded my bike up with an 80 grams of carbs in my one bottle and 40 in the other, and I had some snacks in the back pocket. But again, I was sort of just off. I didn't really, didn't quite know. I wasn't really managing, the time well and the climbs well. And so I sort of started rationing like, well, my 80 grams of carbs in my bottle is, that's the thing I really need for the big climb. But then I didn't realize like, well, where is the big climb in the day? So anyway, kind of screwed the whole thing up. I should have done a little bit more preview of like, what are we doing and when are we doing it? So being organized is super important. And that day, like, as a matter of fact, that day we just started with a 45-minute climb, like right out of the gate. So I didn't even know that. So anyway, be informed, do good logistical planning and route planning, and that will really help your day one get acclimated to the environment. So day two, my main mission was just to eat early and to eat often, and that's what I did. And so I increased my intake by about 50% of carbs over day one, and it turns out I felt fantastic. So I was able to push bigger watts, like at hour four, which hadn't been possible on day one. And also on day two, I get a little more familiar with the route. It was actually more of a 45-minute easier warm up. And then we had two gentle climbs. Then we had bigger climbs midday. So basically, the route was better and my feeling was better. And it turns out that TSS, the training stress score, was very similar from day one to day two, but it was such a drastic feeling of finished day two. It was like, oh, I feel fantastic. I can tackle day three. And it just turns out then that's the strongest rider on day one, which we all thought, this guy's going to blow us all away. Well, actually, he faded on day two just because he was just not feeling enough. Like he's really fit, but he wasn't feeling enough. So that was really interesting. So again, the big lesson here on day two is just get through day one. Don't judge your entire camp based on the first day, and just, stay well fueled and hydrated for the rest of the week, and just focus on steady fueled watts. And that will often just outperform, any kind of day one heroics. Day 3, we just did a recovery spin, and again, with these camps, you don't have to do, we've done, Kitty, you said that we've done like 100 miles, like let's do 100 miles every single day, but you can moderate it a little bit. So day 3, we're like, we're kind of a little bit tired, so let's just go do a recovery spin of 2.5 hours, and we did one 10-minute threshold just to sort of stay in tune with speed. But definitely take a recovery day, if you call 2.5 hour bike a recovery day in your training camp. But you, again, sort of moderate on a certain day. And then day 4, it's funny. I started day 4 and I was like, I'm tired. And for me, I have this probably, not my best quality, but I'll start a ride or say a big, run, and I'll say to myself, okay, well, how do I feel? And I want to always like classify myself as like, oh, I feel really good or I feel really bad. And I'm going along the first hour of the fourth day, and I just realized like, wait a minute, there's this third option, which is like, I just kind of feel like in the middle of the bell curve. Like I feel okay. I don't feel like bad and I don't feel good. I just feel like, yeah, I feel okay. And I realized like, wait a minute, that's an option too. And I think I'm just conditioned from this whole polarized world. Like you gotta be this, you gotta be that, you gotta take this stand, that stand. And I just realized like, I don't have much of an opinion actually. Just I feel decent and that's okay. And that sort of just helped me sort of relax into the day, saying, okay, you're just in the middle here. And so what was interesting also too is on day 4 is my heart rate was really suppressed. And you'll see this a lot with training camps. You may start day 1, your heart rate may be up a little bit higher because of, dehydration and being tired. And by day 4, I was just aerobically tired. And so normally I could get my heart rate up to about like around 170, 175 on the first day. And then by day 4, I couldn't get my heart rate beyond 155. I was really aerobically tired. So anyway, so this is like Charlotte, that heart rate can be misleading both on the first day and also on the fourth day. So if you do a big camp like this, if you're doing heart rate zones, your heart rate zones are really going to change based upon how tired you are. And so my last thought on this here was that I went to this camp with some buddies and there was no real competition per se, right? We were all there to sort of cooperate and to do biking in beautiful Mallorca. But we are humans and that, there's always this natural tendency to compare strength and speed between people. And it's sort of human nature, right? And we're there to categorize each other's, abilities and traits. And that's just natural because our brains love predictability. We want to know who we're dealing with, what we're dealing with, what's going to possibly happen. And so we're always predicting and therefore we're always sort of, I think, judging ourselves and judging other people. So I just want to say like, even though we had this complete spirit of cooperation. It was such a wonderful time with these two guys. There was always still just a little bit of competition there. So don't be surprised if you go to a training camp and people are like, who's doing what, who's stronger, who's this and that. And I don't think it's anything bad. I just think it's just, it's who we are. And I think it became very playful and really fun. Again, more in the spirit of cooperation, but just being aware that there is, people we are always competing because we are kind of competitive people. So anyway, those are some of my bike camp lessons. I hope that everybody here gets a chance at some point this year or next year, whatever, to either do a staycation and do a camp like this, running camp, bike camp, maybe swim camp, and just, yeah, you'll get tremendous fitness and great camaraderie and just really, I really enjoyed myself. So I really hope everybody gets a chance to do this.
Woohoo, this is awesome. I'm super inspired to go do a camp now, maybe in Mallorca, maybe even just in the greater Boston area or the Upper Valley. But I love this for all those reasons. And a couple things I wanted to pull out was +1 on this whole idea of heart rate suppression. Often that can be a really good sign of fatigue, where yes, like if your heart rate's really, really high, that can be signaling something. But if you cannot get it up, but you feel like you're working really hard, that can be kind of a fatigue sign. So just keep tabs on that. Sometimes that just means like, hey, you're really tired. You need some type of recovery week or a rest week. And another thing that I wanted to pull out of this was you're talking about sort of this day 1, like heroes can often be day 4 zeros, or they're totally kind of fading out. And I think a lot of this comes back to the idea of impulse control, which is really, really hard. But for endurance sports, impulse control is one of the most valuable things that you can do. And this actually leads right into another insight that I had from an athlete who raced over the weekend. She raced a marathon out in Ohio, which is in Southern California. And it's a really interesting course because the first 6 or so miles are kind of hilly, uphill, rolling. And then you hit this downhill stretch that's like 12, 14, super long downhill stretch all the way to the ocean in Ventura. And then I think the ending is just about flat. And in her pre-race call, we were talking a lot about how this race is all about impulse control, where you don't want to burn all your matches in those first 6 miles because then you're going to be trashed going downhill. You have to instead really hold back, go under goal marathon pace for the first 6, and trust that you are going to make it up as soon as you hit the downhill. And so this athlete did an incredible job of really listening to that. And it was interesting because her goal, this was her first marathon, her goal was to run under 4 hours. And she said she actually had to let the 4 hour pacer pass her in the beginning and then just know, okay, I'm going to catch this person later on. And she did. She had the impulse control. She let the pacer go. And then she caught the pacer and she finished like 10 minutes under her goal time, which was so exciting, which just speaks to this whole idea of impulse control. And this is true in Ironman too. I mean, I've talked about how I'll see people pass me on the bike and you just whisper, like, I'll see you on the run. Or you see people coming out of the gates in T2 and you're like, I will see you at mile 20. You just have to be patient. But patience is always the way to win these races, or the way to do well, is just kind of holding that impulse to go so hard in the beginning.
Yeah, shout out to those athletes. I mean, so executed like a pro. I mean, this is just
Mhm.
amazing to watch to let that 4 hour pacer run by you. It must have been just like, I mean, my brain would have exploded, right?
Yeah.
And this athlete's so emotionally mature to do that. And like you say, right, one of my favorite things to do at Lake Placid, and I always tell our athletes don't do this, is that it's super exciting when you get out of the water in Lake Placid because the whole street is lined with people, like 3 or 4 deep, but people are screaming, and people come out of the water, they go up the hill, they start running down the hill transition, and people are sprinting like crazy. And I get it because the crowd's screaming like it's your day, you're like a rock star. But I'm always like, no, do not run, do not sprint down the hill to T1. This day is so long. And also there's a really big hill actually coming into when you complete the first loop in Lake Placid, there's a huge hill coming up to, I think it's in Norwood School. And I'll see people just sprinting up this hill so fast. And I just want to be at the top of the hill taking the numbers and just say, hey, I'm going to be out in the course, on the run course later at mile 18. I got your number. I just want to check in to see how you're feeling afterwards. So,
Exactly, exactly. And none of these times are the time to burn a match. We'll talk about this later, like how and when to burn a match. It is absolutely not during any of these times. So shout out to athletes that have the mental fortitude for impulse control. But if you need to, if you know that you struggle with impulse control in life, it may be a challenge for you in racing too. And that's really something to work on your mindset perspective.
I want this probably leads into actually one of your things. Like, so I want to hear about those GI issues on long runs because what happened this week? Was there pollen in the air? What's going on out there? Did people run out of Martin? What happened? Is there a Martin shortage?
Well, this was funny. I mean, Jim, you and I talk about how often training piece comments come in batches, and you'll see like a bunch of athletes are all like, "Oh, I'm really tired," and it turns out that it's like seasonal affective disorder or whatever, or like, "Oh my gosh, I had this terrible bike ride in the rain," because everyone biked in Boston in the rain. But this weekend, I had all these comments come in. I think I counted 6 different athletes were just talking about experiencing different types of GI issues on long runs. And first of all, want to shout out the athletes that brought that up because some people are like, "I don't want to talk about this," or "This is embarrassing," or whatever it is. Every single person who's an endurance athlete has experienced this at some point or another. So it's definitely something to talk about, and something to leave your coach in about. So whenever this happens, I just have a few kind of tips that athletes can think about. One of those is I think it's helpful to try to normalize your workout and meal times when you can so your body stays on a schedule. I often find that like GI issues could be worse for late afternoon or evening runs, for example, especially if your body isn't used to it because you like picked up a sweet green salad for lunch and that did not work for your pre-run instead of like, oh, normally I wake up and I eat oatmeal and that's really easy to digest. But that being said, it's also important to train your body to run at the time of day of your race, especially if you're concerned about having GI issues in a race. So if you always do your long run at 11 a.m. and your marathon starts at 6 a.m., you are a lot more likely to have some type of GI distress or not be able to go to the bathroom beforehand. So practice kind of training your body to do what it needs to do at the right time. I also tell athletes try to keep a pretty plain diet the morning before your runs, as well as like the 1 or 2 days before, especially for racing. So, like, keep up your normal volume of food. You want to make sure that you're eating enough. But I usually say, hey, just keep it plain. Like, if you're recovering from a stomach bug, a lot of white rice and bread and crackers and all that type of stuff can be helpful if you experience pretty serious GI issues. I also say people should watch the caffeine intake because sometimes, that can help you in the morning, but too much can be pretty tough on the GI system. And especially if you haven't taken caffeinated gels before, you should practice with that before you try it in a race setting, just because a lot of people don't handle that as well. And then I will say too, in really extreme cases, if you feel like this is an issue, like every time you go out for a run, it is worth checking in with your doctor for like, do you have a gluten intolerance? Do you have a dairy intolerance? Do you have IBS? Like there's a lot of things that can come up. And I would say like, this is normal every so often, but if it's an issue every single time, there's probably something else going on under the surface. And that's definitely worth looping in a coach about because you don't want this to ruin your ability to actually execute on these long runs or these workouts. So it is okay. It sucks. Hang in there, folks. And hopefully this wasn't like a Boston water quality, like something was just so many people in the Boston area. But again, like definitely lots of things that you can try to make it a little bit easier.
Some mistakes that I have made, I think, in the long run that have caused GIS stress is like I'm saying to myself, like, okay, it's a long run. So therefore I'm gonna do, try something new, or I'm using this product over here and not this product that I normally use. And then going out there and going like, oh, that was a big mistake. I probably should use the same product I use. Like my Monday through Friday runs. I should have used it maybe on the same weekends if I tried something really different and really new. And that could also be a cause. And this is also related to, so I, on this podcast, keep talking about Martin because it's just, for me, it's a game changer. And there's something about that liquid. I've never been a liquid carbs guy, but I've turned to a liquid carbs guy now this year. I love it. It makes me feel full. It gives me lots of energy. And I recently bought the new Tailwind high carb mix, which just came out. And I haven't tried it yet. But what I did do is I looked at the back and I said, okay, what's the ingredients of the Tailwind versus the Martin? And they seem to be very different products. I think the first ingredient is like dextrose with Tailwind and it's maltodextro with Martin. And you read through the list and it's like, oh, these are two very different type of sugars that are going on here. They're using some of the same stuff, but there's not a lot of overlap. And I'm kind of curious to try out like the Tailwind one and see, does that agree with me or not? But that can be one thing too, is like, you're trying one product, then you try another product, and they could just be very, very different compositions and sugars. And maybe your body is biased or more used to one type of sugar mixture than the other.
Totally. And this is also speaks to the point of make sure that you log this stuff in Training Peaks. I love it when athletes say like, hey, I tried a precision and it was great, but then this week I tried a Martin and it didn't settle, or vice versa, whatever that is. You can go back and say like, okay, this is trial and error. And it's not fun to have GI issues in training, but it's way better to have it in training than in racing. So if you can just get all of that figured out now, I think now's the time to do it. If you have 12 weeks until your A race, like use this as a trial period to figure out exactly what you're going to do on race day. So you're not trying anything new and you've already kind of tested everything that's going to happen.
Yeah, great point on the Training Peaks diary. And I've been really kind of, all my athletes will be nodding their heads on this one. I often will get the first time people will say, these are all the things that I ate. And I'll just do a big long sentence of like, this are all the things I had. And I had gummy bears and I had this and I had that. And I just always go back and go, I don't care what you had total. Give me an hour by hour breakdown of what you had. And then they come back, oh, of course. And so we get this beautiful hour breakdown. I had this product and this many carbs and this and that. And then it's like, okay, that's the diary that we need. That's because you can always go back to that because you had a great ride this weekend. So just repeat that same thing. And I always do this too because I forget. Like I come home and I'll throw the packages and the gels and I throw them into trash. And then like next Sunday I'm like, what did I do last week? I have such a short memory. So if I'm writing things down, it really helps me.
Yeah, you got to celebrate the fact that there's someone out there who actually cares about what you ate during hour 2 of your 4-hour bike ride and wants to know if it was the honey stinger, it was the
Right.
tailwind. That's us. That's our
Exactly.
job.
We've been keeping track of mostly with carbs and sodium has been really that's been our big two that we've been keeping track of the most. I don't know. Do you do anything differently?
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. I definitely nudge my athletes to do it. And the biggest question I ask if I don't get a comment is, how is your fueling? How is your
Yeah.
hydration? All that. And they're like, oh, wow, she's asking again, but I always want to know. Because again, fitness and fueling are equal partners on race day. We've learned this so many times. So we will say that on every podcast until the end of time.
We will say it in every podcast because it's true. Right. Exactly
Yeah.
right. Well, okay. So this is not in the outline, but I'm going to tell you, I had a conversation with somebody who's my son-in-law's sister is running a marathon. They're running the Rotterdam Marathon, I think, this weekend. And I said, so, hey, Helen, I said, what are you doing for fueling? And she said, oh, I'm doing this in my long runs. I said, well, how many gels are you taking in an hour for your long run? She goes, oh, just one. And she was really proud of like, I only need one. And the way she said it, I thought, oh, she's been sort of conditioned. And I think there is this thing out there, like this Puritan work ethic or something, like the less you need, the tougher you are. And I grew up, and it's funny, I grew up in an environment, my dad would work all the time. And at the end of the day, he goes, I've only had 2 cups of coffee and, one glass of milk today. And it was something to be proud of. I don't know why. But Helen was like, I'm super proud that I only have to use one gel. And I said to her, okay, well, let's try to up that to like 60, 2 gels an hour. And she looks at me, she goes, well, why should I? And I could have launched into this whole thing like, well, sports science says so and so, so and so. But instead, I took the tactic. I said, have you worked hard to train for this marathon? She goes, yes. I said, do you want to do well in this marathon? She said, yes. I said, pace goals, time goals? Yes. I said, great. I said, take 2 gels per hour. And she goes, oh, okay. And so that was it's better. Like, you've worked so hard. You're a very ambitious person, right? And she's a very hardworking person. I just didn't want to see her fail. But she had this notion of like, I don't need that much. And I can be proud of it. It's like, no, 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 no. Let's go the other way. So I hope she has a great marathon.
I hope so too. And this is all about optimizing, right? Like we're in the business of trying to optimize performance. So yeah, maybe you can survive and not like collapse. I mean, some people probably would collapse in marathon with only one gel, but maybe you can get through it. But I don't
Mhm.
think we're here trying to help people get through it. Like we want
Right.
people to have their very best day. And if your best day is unlocked just by 2 gels an hour, like just do it. That's so awesome.
I know it's so easy. And I also said to her, like, Helen, then you can go off and like, do you want to feel better like during the last miles and better after the marathon? She's like, yes. I was like, okay, then let's fuel. And so we jumped on the internet. We looked at a bunch of like SIS gels and Martin gels and this and that because she was trying some other weird brand thing. And I was like, I don't know that works, but I know these work. And so grab some of these. So anyway,
There you go. You're in the business
Mhm.
of changing lives, Jim. It's awesome.
We are.
Can I talk about my new bike? I'm excited to talk about buying a new bike.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So I want to hear about it because that's one of the most exciting days of people's lives, right? Is a new bike day.
Yeah, childbirth and a new bike. Those are the two.
Right. Exactly right. Yeah. Not getting a boat. That's for sure. It's getting a bike.
So I have a new bike. The reason I got a new road bike recently is because I learned that my bike had extensive carbon frame damage. I've had this bike for probably 6 or 7 years. It has maybe 10,000 miles on it, probably more than that. I mean, if we're riding 5,000 miles a year,
Oh yeah.
it's got a lot of miles on
Yeah.
this bike. But
You might
anyway,
get 20,000 or so more on that bike. Yeah.
yes, my Cervelo R3 I'd had for a very long time and took it to the shop, realized I needed a new one, or the repairs were going to be basically more than the frame is worth. So that's actually maybe my first point is if you have a catastrophic mechanical situation, you should run the numbers on how much will it cost to actually repair this or maintain it over time versus how much will a new bike cost. Because if you've got a really old bike that every time you go to the bike shop, you're spending $300 on the repair, very soon that's going to kind of take over what the bike is even worth. So I realized, I could end up getting a repair on this and I would probably be more than the bike is worth. And I'm probably going to want a new bike with new components and everything at some point anyway.
And not to scare people, but I think, carbon damage is not uncommon. So I don't want to put the impression like, oh, you should take all your bikes and run to the bike store and you have to buy a new bike. But it's not uncommon to, to maybe just even like to fall over, and then you hit a rock and then suddenly like, one of your chain stays is kind of like compromised. And so it unfortunately does happen and which it can be a little bit costly. And it's also not that uncommon. So if you do like have just like you fall off your bike or something just weird happens in travel, it is worth going to the bike shop and saying like, hey, can you check this out? Because it does happen, unfortunately. Carbon's a little sensitive.
Yeah, it's light and fast and also not as durable as like if you have a steel bike.
Right.
But anyway, so first maybe I thought we could talk a little bit about pros and cons of buying a new bike versus a used bike. Something nice about a new bike is, you know exactly what you're getting. There's not going to be any issues with it that aren't totally clear what's going on. But there are also some incredible used bikes out there. And especially coming out of COVID, we've seen this in the last several years that like everyone decided that they were going to be a competitive cyclist during COVID, bought a beautiful bike for several $1,000s and then put 50 miles on it and it's still in their garage. And so especially in the last few years, there have been a lot of options for used bikes that don't have a lot of miles on them. And so we're going to link a couple different resources in the show notes that you can check out if you want to try to buy a used bike. One is called Bicycle, there's Pink Bike, there's the Pros Closet, which is a lot of bikes kind of formerly owned by professional cyclists, Craigslist, eBay, all of these do have pretty good options. However, with anything buying online, especially a big purchase, sometimes it's going to be a scam or sometimes it's not going to be exactly represented as it was. So I think generally with the Pros Closet, Bicycle, and Pink Bike, you're in pretty good shape with that. Most of these are pretty vetted and you can also make sure that the seller is legit, but Craigslist, eBay, you might have a little bit more trouble with that. So those are sort of the pros and cons. Things that I think about and tell my athletes is first think about the frame. Carbon is best. There are bikes out there that are aluminum or steel, but carbon is the lightest and the fastest. So if you can prioritize a carbon frame, that's important. There's also different tiers of components to think about. So there's Shimano and SRAM are probably the two most common brands. We usually say if you can get Ultegra or better, which is sort of like the middle good option or like towards the top for Shimano or Rival or better for SRAM, just because they're going to last longer. So yes, they are more expensive up front, but if you get kind of the entry level bike, you're not going to get as many miles on them. So you might actually end up having to replace them more often, which will maybe be more expensive in the long run. So get good components. They're also just more efficient and work better. Wheels are easy to upgrade, but one of the best ways to make you faster. So a carbon wheel set is awesome. But if you get a bike that doesn't have a good carbon wheel set, you could maybe try to buy wheels used, for example. And I will probably sell the old carbon wheels that I had on my Cervelo if anyone wants to buy them because I have new carbon wheels on my new bike. So reach out if you're looking for some pretty good carbon wheels for your bike. And then finally, some nice to haves, but not required, are electronic shifting is nice. It's a little bit smoother. However, it's devastating if you forget to charge it, whereas manual shifting is not going to break due to electronic issues. So that's something to think about. And then some bikes have an integrated power meter, which you could get if you wanted to. But we also find power pedal is something like the Osceola are a good bet if you don't have the integrated power meter. So I wouldn't say, oh, I'm only going to get this bike if it has these two things. Two extremely important and sometimes overlooked variables are number one, the fit of the bike. It has to be the right size. So I've seen this before where athletes will come across a bike and they're like, it's perfect, it's carbon, it's a great deal, it's got an integrated power meter, and it's not the right size. And they get it anyway, and then it's just never going to work for you. I don't care if it's a $15,000 bike that you found on sale for $600. If it's not the right size, it's not going to work for you. So use the size charts and know that kind of each brand has different sizing. So Canyon, for example, has like small, medium, and large. And then Cervelo has like 51, 54, 56, et cetera, 58. Specialized has a 52, and I'll talk about why I went with that in a minute. But there's different sizing for different bikes. And then another variable that I think is so important is the color. You want the bike to be a sexy bike that you love if you're going to spend this amount of money on it. And so for me, when I was looking at all these different options, I talked to a bike shop, I looked at some used bikes, and a lot of the ones that were hitting these other criteria were like gray or black. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of cool. And then I found this beautiful matte pink bike, and it hit all the criteria that I was looking for. But the thing I love the most about it is the color, because I feel like I'll be super badass when I just take down a mammal in Cohasset who's trying to pass me, and then I zoom by on my pink matte bike. It's like so, so, so cool. So all that is to say, I ended up buying a new bike just because I was kind of running the numbers on what I wanted, and that made the most sense for me. And it was really nice because I was able to partner with my local bike shop. They were able to put the whole thing together. I was able to do a bike fit there, so I have that scheduled for next week. And that was sort of folded into the cost of the bike since I bought it direct from them. They were also able to just do little things like switch over my bottle cages and set up my seat height to where the old bike had been and install even little things like my Garmin mount. Like they took care of all that for me. So that's really nice. And they'll know the bike well if I have issues kind of going forward. I can just bring it in. Good to establish that relationship. And now I have a reputation as the pink Specialized girl, which is
Right.
cool. um, and so I'm really excited about it. It's been really, really fun to take this new bike out. I'm kind of learning the bike, learning how it works. It's a little bit different than my Cervelo, but yeah, reach out if anyone has questions about buying a new bike. It is a really important purchase as a triathlete or a cyclist, and I think it will upgrade your life in a pretty big way.
Yeah, congratulations. New bike day is one of the best days.
Yep, it is.
I want to go back to you. One of your points was obviously the fit's important, and then the frame size is interesting because so I bought a Canyon, and I'm a big Cervelo fan, and so when I went to go buy the Canyon gravel bike, I was just assuming it's sort of the same, frame size as Cervelo. So I take a 56 in Cervelo. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to do a large and, in Canyon. And so I said, well, I better get on their website, just, go through the whole, like, they have a really nice, you put in all your data, your physical data, and they say which frame size. And it came out, it said medium. I was like, oh gosh, I would have totally just bought a large. It would have been the wrong size. And then I got the bike and it is a medium frame. And it turns out it's actually perfect. It's like almost even better than the 56. I almost wish I maybe had a 54 in the Cervelo. So anyway, that's just an important thing. Like every manufacturer has their own sort of criteria for the size of their frame. So it's worth going through that. Usually they'll have like a little widget or something you'll go through and put in all your stuff. So worth doing that because I would have bought the wrong size.
Yeah, Canyon's kind of weird on their sizing. I have a small Canyon for my TT bike, and I'm 5'6", like I'm sort of an average height for a woman. And yet I think if it were any bigger, if I were any smaller, it wouldn't fit right. So if you probably are under maybe 5'6", 5'5", you probably can't ride a Canyon, which is too bad because they don't really have an extra small on their TT bikes, for example. But again, yeah, check the website and see what the sizing looks like and know that maybe some brands are not going to be the best fit for you just because of that. And for me, especially this Specialized is a great fit because it's a 52. Cervelo, I always struggled with the fact that the 51 was a little small and the 54 was a little bit big. So you might have to do a little bit of research on like where do you actually fall. And if you have an opportunity to test ride a bike, I knew the Specialized worked for me because I'd borrowed a Specialized that a friend had and it was always the perfect fit. And I loved that. But you can't even go into a bike shop and usually they'll let you like take it around the block or even hop on a trainer and see if it's a good fit for you before you actually make the purchase, which is an advantage to buying new as compared to used. You just don't really know what you're going to get when it's used.
Yeah, the local bike shop, definitely for the win. Yeah.
Awesome. Jim, can we talk about how and when to burn a match? I love that insight from you, and it relates to a couple things that we've talked about so far in this racing context.
Yeah, sure. So this sort of came up. We actually, Katie and I, we had a bunch of folks racing done nationals, college club nationals in Florida. And, the bike course and run course on there was very interesting because there was a lot of, I guess, 180 turns on the bike course. And so I was telling some of our folks who are more fit, I was saying, hey, when you come out of those turns, on the bike, really stand up and really, go to 150% of, the FTP, get back up to speed very quickly. And the reason you can do that is because, you're fit, right? And, a lot of times in triathlon, we are advocating even effort. And that's generally the best way to go with racing. So easy swim, steady on the bike, leave it all out there for the run kind of thing. But there are cases where if you're fitter or just courses where it helps to, sort of put in these short bursts of power or pace, sort of like you're attacking in a bike race or attacking maybe on a hill in a cross country race or something. So anyway, so why would you do this? Well, think about a race where you're sort of equal fitness of everybody else, or pace anyway, and you come to a hill and you've done a lot of, like, say, hill repeats, and you're fit, like, yeah, surge up that hill, right, and get away from people. And you think if you get 2 or 3 seconds here and there, that really adds up. And that was my idea, sort of, for the national folks, are saying, like, hey, if you can get ahead of somebody and all these turns, if it adds up to 2 or 3 seconds over time, you may end up now a minute off the bike faster than somebody who just said, I'm going to go even effort. So that can just really give you a critical edge, over your competitors. And, the more you develop the ability to burn matches at key moments in a race, the more strategic and successful racing becomes. And it's also it's like a huge confidence booster. It's really fun just to kind of stand up. It feels like a superpower, right? Like, I'm going for it, right? You put in the work. And so, what I like about that is that, when other people may dread parts of the course, they're like going like, oh, I can't wait to see the hill or the corner, and I'm going to, like, kind of go for it. But again, that's really predicated on that you've practiced this and you have some level of fitness. If you are going to a race and the race is sort of a stretch goal for you, we don't recommend, like, you quote, burning matches. But if you show up, say, for example, like we've done this before, Katie, we've been training for Ironman and we show up for an Olympic distance race and we're like, oh, this is basically a day off, right? So just go out and just attack the hell out of the bike course because you have that bike fitness, right? And why not? And then just build up a lead on the bike, and then hold on for the run. So anyway, it's just one more way of racing, and it's just a call to just the fitter you get, the more options you have on race day.
Totally. And I think this especially applies for short course racing, so sprints and Olympics, because if you're trying to burn matches really early on in an Ironman, unless you can really get your heart rate down right after, it can kind of come back and hurt you. So just be careful about using this in the longer distance races. But short stuff, absolutely strategically burn your matches. And that's where I think it's fun as you develop as an athlete, you actually get to bring more strategy of racing into your races of like, hey, I'm keeping an eye on who's around me. I know I can push here. I should probably hold back there. I'm going to go out front. I'm going to go in the back. All of that becomes really, really relevant as you build fitness over time. And know that even if you're just out like in a group ride, this is also a really fun thing to practice of, can I surge up a hill and then actually recover? And if you find that you can't recover from it, you surge and then you're up heart rate for the rest of the ride. That probably means you either surge too hard or aerobically you're not ready to do that. But the skill of being able to recover and bring your heart rate back down after a hard effort is huge. You can actually do workouts that are focused on that, thinking about float intervals, thinking about like fast 25s, easy 25s, alternating in the pool, all that type of stuff I think is really useful.
Yeah, and this sort of rolls into one of my other ones that I want to talk about today, which is like intervals are compressed learning. And I'm always talking about how racing is this really rich learning environment. And so for me personally, like, I haven't done a lot of structured training in the past number of years, but now coming back from this injury, I decided this year, okay, I'm going to really kind of put myself on a structured plan. I'm actually going to go out and do bike intervals as opposed to just riding my bike around. And so I've just been learning a ton. And this sort of relates back to this burning the matches. And we just talked about here is that, say you go up a big hill and you surge hard, you get to the top of the hill and you're just dead. And you're like, okay, like either am I not fit or did I attack the hill too fast at the bottom, or like, what's going on here? So this is just a call out for, all of our athletes who we're coaching obviously are getting structured intervals. But if you're not being coached by us, or you're just like, you're a recreationist who just wants to put in a little bit more structure, I would say start, looking at some of these short intervals, right? And so, for example, the day I went out and this is just simple 8 by 1 minute bike intervals anaerobic capacity, which is about 150% of your FTP, which how that translates is like, I have to go pretty hard up the hill, right? These are really tough efforts that mimic the demands of a group ride or a group race. And so back when I wasn't training in a structured way, it may have taken me weeks to accumulate 8 1-minute efforts at that intensity. But now with structured training, I got this whole compressed learning done in 30 minutes. So I went from like, learning about 1 minute intervals in, 30 minutes as opposed to, months or weeks, right? And the main lesson here is how I executed the first interval compared to the last interval was like dramatically different. And so in the first couple of intervals, I went out way, way, way too hard, like probably 200% on my FTP. It was stupid. And then I faded fast at the end. So then I started experimenting. I started spinning a little bit of higher cadence and then sort of also trying to ease more into the effort. And I was sort of, again, this is where a power meter is really nice. I sort of look at the numbers and say, okay, that was too fast. That was too slow. And then by the sixth interval, I kind of had it dialed in and I had sort of this smooth, sustained effort for the full minute. And then I was even to do like a little bit of a kick of power at the end. Anyway, I finished that workout not just with fitness gains, but also I had this like new skills and confidence to attack short intensity efforts. And I just felt myself after this, again, very simple 8 by 1 minutes. I'm like, I want to go out and get in a group ride, a good race, and I'm ready to go for it. I just felt so empowered by the whole thing. And I feel like I really learned so much. And I was really surprised when I came back with the numbers. I was like, oh, I really did hit the numbers that I thought I was going to hit. I was very much in doubt I was going to hit those numbers. I actually ended up hitting them, and I just felt like, okay, great. I do have the fitness, and now I have the skill to actually to attack a hill. So anyway, just to call out to add a little more structure if you're a person again who's not doing a lot of structure in your training. And the same principle applies to running. And so, for example, like I have a standard, we all have these standard running routes, right? And I've got one particular running route which has a big hill in it. And what I've done in the past is, I've gone and run that hill multiple times, as opposed to like I'll go run that hill and maybe I'll run that hill maybe 10 times in the whole summer, but you actually go to that same hill and run it 6 times or 8 times in one session, and then think how much better you'll be on that type of hill, after. So again, compressing that time from months into even just into one session. And that's just, again, will give you more fitness and more confidence to execute on race day.
Yeah, and if you're nervous about it, just try a baby version of that. Do 3 hill repeats when otherwise you would just do
Mhm.
1 in that easy run, and then you'll
Yep.
find that the next time it's like, "Oh, 3 was actually fine, and maybe I could do 5, and maybe I could do 8." You don't have to say, "I'm doing 20 hill repeats or bust." Like, that's probably too daunting to
Right.
even think about it from
Yep.
an initial point, but something is better than nothing. Even twice is better than just the single time.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. Twice is 100% more than you've done, right? So that's
Yeah,
huge.
that's
Exactly. Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. So start easy, but yeah, just, put some structure in. I'm just really enjoying it. And I feel like I'm thinking more like an athlete. I just feel like I have a lot more confidence this year just by just doing these short intervals. And it gets me psyched to do more. Like the other day, I think I've now done, I don't know, 4 or 5 sessions like this. And I was like, I love this. This is fantastic.
Love it. That's so good. So, Jim, can I shift us to talking to a couple more race day insights? I've had a couple
Yes.
athletes racing, and I want to talk about navigating race day uncontrollables. And this is actually not about me. I've had uncontrollables in races that we've talked about, but this is about another athlete who recently raced at Ironman 70.3 Oceanside. So that's sort of the season opener of the 70.3s. She had an incredible training cycle. She was so ready. We had our pre-race call, and we talked about how the only thing she was really nervous about was, okay, what if I get a major bike mechanical? And I remember telling her, if the only thing you're worried about is a major bike mechanical, you're in a really good place. That's so common. And what's tricky about a major bike mechanical is, other than just having your bike generally maintenanced, it's something that you can't really control. And it can happen, and it can be a total freak thing. And despite having a great swim and having a great start to the bike and ultimately also having a great run, she did have a major bike mechanical during this race. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what you do if that happens, and then how to try to think about it from a mindset perspective. So logistically, if you have a major bike mechanical, start trying to fix it yourself. So if it's like a really bad flat or something, take off the wheel, like move in that direction. You should at least know how to do that. But if that doesn't work, there will be mechanics on the course, especially for these bigger races. They will be kind of all over. And often people who see you, if they see a mechanic, they'll just say, hey, there's someone back up the road. So they will hopefully be with you within 10, 15, maybe maximum 20 minutes. And they can usually help you kind of almost immediately. Then I think, separate from logistically, this is so much easier said than done. But being able to sort of regulate emotionally is really, really important in these situations. And when you get shaken, I mean, you have this very visceral reaction to it, and it can be upsetting and it can be scary and you can be disappointed. But you do have to remind yourself that getting upset about it won't actually help the situation. And instead, you almost have to turn off that muscle that's like, I'm freaking out, and focus on what you can control in that moment. And I want to shout out to my athlete for absolutely doing this to a T. She handled it so well. And that actually led to her being able to get the mechanics there, fix the bike, finish the bike strong, and have a great run. And it's interesting, actually, I never thought, Jim, that I would bring in a golf experience metaphor to the Endurance Drive podcast. And this is grounds for people to just turn us off right now, like golf. But I was watching golf over the weekend because my family was watching it and it was on. And I was watching that guy, Rory McIlroy, doing his whole trying to win this special thing that people are going to say, I'm butchering this. But anyway, it's a big deal thing that he just did, that Tiger Woods and others have done with winning all like the Masters or whatever. Anyway, Rory messed up in this one moment where he needed to putt it in, like from not that far away, to win this huge thing. And then it didn't work out. And so then he had to go into this sort of playoff round or whatever, one more hole with this other guy to see if he could actually achieve this goal. And that, you could tell he was so disappointed and he was devastated in the moment. But he didn't choke because he had to focus on, hey, I still have another opportunity here and I have to do this. And with millions of people watching, I have to put this into, something close to me. So I think here, think about like mindset wise, lock in, focus on what you can control, what you can do, accept the thing that has happened, but don't let it kind of impact where you're at. And then two, once that's already happened, if you get back on the bike or you get back into your putting or whatever that is, I think you can think about kind of subtracting time in a way that helps you think about your overall fitness. So the way I describe that is my athlete and I talked about how, if we took away those 20 to 30 minutes that she lost dealing with this mechanical, she would have had a really, really fast race that was in alignment with her goals. And from a fitness perspective, I think that that's actually achieving your goals. So yes, the time officially on the clock isn't the time that we had hoped for, but it's not because of her fitness at all. And at the end of the day, we're here trying to improve fitness. So that's another thing that you can sort of think about. And yeah, just shout out to her for being really mentally locked in. It sucks when this happens, but there's a lot of things that you can do to try to say, you know what, we're moving forward. We can still get something out of this day and we can still make it fun.
Yeah, it sounds like your athlete handled this so well, and it's so hard. Like I flip out. Like I have such a hard time flipping out. Like I put so much into this race, and why did this thing happen to me? And just to be able to say, okay, time out. And I love this hack about okay, the time I'm sitting here on the side of the road is going to be. I'm just going to subtract it at the end of the day, and just say I'm in a timeout right now, right? And so whether that time is 5 minutes or 8 minutes or 20 minutes, like I'm going to take it off the end of the day and continue on. So yeah, huge shout out to your athlete and shout out to you for the golf reference. I actually don't watch golf either, but this clearly was some sort of cultural moment because I did see this on lots of headlines of this Rory guy winning this golf thing. I think he won the Tour de France, I think is what it was.
Yeah, it was something like that. Or was it UTMB with the of
It
golf?
was UTMB. I think Roy won UTMB, right? Exactly right, and Tour of Flanders at the same time. So anyway, but actually, this is funny. This actually reminds me. This is so unrelated, but I saw a quote this week. This really struck me, which was, and it's a quote by Billie Jean King, and she said, pressure is privilege, and I just thought, oh my gosh, like again, when I get so much in my head about races and just get so much pressure on myself and get worked up about it, I should just realize like it's a privilege to feel that pressure. So I have to remind myself of that. So really keep the bigger picture. And then I saw that quote, pressure is privilege, but actually the full quote is pressure is privilege and champions adjust. And I thought that's amazing. So I'm gonna keep that quote myself top of head for this year.
I love that. Okay, and then I have one more insight sort of related to emotions and racing, which maybe we can hit really quick. I want to talk about the post-race blues, which is relevant as a lot of our athletes are kind of finishing up races. I'm just recently coming off a race as well. And so the first thing I want to talk about with post-race blues, it's sort of that sad feeling that you get that doesn't really make sense, especially after you have a really, really good race. But as I've learned more about it, it turns out a lot of this is actually just physiological. So if you think about, you finished that race, and despite the fact that you were hurting so bad for so long, you get this rush of endorphins and dopamine and other happy hormones that makes you feel really, really awesome. And you can't sustain that forever and ever. And so sometimes you get home, you put your medal away, and those days after, it's actually kind of a change in your brain chemistry that can make you feel a little bit lower. And I was experiencing that in the couple days after my race. I'm like, I had the best day ever. Like everything all worked out. And why am I kind of sad? Like what's going on right now? And so instead of like really wallowing in that too much, I've tried to think about things that you can do if you are feeling that post-race blues, other than just validating the fact that it's really normal. One of those things is celebrating and enjoying what's harder to do in peak training. So I talked about before, like staying up a little bit later. Or I believe the morning after my marathon, I went out and had breakfast with someone, which like I never go out for breakfast with someone because that's my prime workout time. And I've got to like take down my oatmeal and whatever that is. And I'm like, here I am just lounging through breakfast, like celebrate brunch. That's super fun. Moving forward, kind of as you get back into your week, I think it can help to stick to your routine as much as possible while still allowing your body to recover. So if, for example, you're really used to waking up at 5:30 and you do your workout at 6, like do some zone 1 recovery movement at 6. Do yoga or something like that. Don't go out and do a hard run right after a marathon, but you can still use that time as like sort of your mental refresh movement time. I think it's also sometimes helpful to start just thinking a little bit about other races that you might be interested in doing. But I do recommend waiting at least like 2, 4 weeks, even longer before signing up for anything else. And what you can do in that time is think about your season, and you can even go through that goal mapping exercise that we've talked about. Think about what is my purpose in training and racing? What did I really like about this season? What did I not like about it? And all of that can help you think about what an appropriate next event would be. But give yourself time to decompress, because you might find that you have this initial dip into post-race blues. then you start to sort of settle and you're like, hey, I actually kind of like this life. Like, this is actually kind of great. And I'm not super jazzed about jumping right into really, really hard workouts. And you might decide, like, hey, I need an early off season, or I want to do another run race, even though I was going to do a triathlon, or I want to do a bike race, or I want to do a backpacking trip. All of those things might come up. So give yourself the time to actually see how you feel in the post race era, because I think emotions are just a mess right after a race. And you can't really trust any decisions that you make in that like 1 week period afterwards.
And it's so natural too. We talked about this, getting back to sort of like Lake Placid. Is it first of all, runners, marathon runners, ultra runners, triathletes, we do so much training by ourselves. It's such a solo work, right? As much as we get to do some stuff with friends and intervals and group runs, group rides, the majority of people, the majority of their time is spent doing solo. And then you show up at a place like Lake Placid and you are a rock star. You are a superstar for the day. There are literally thousands of people cheering you on all day long. And it's just incredible to be in that environment. And how often do we, as sort of normal working people, we get a chance to be in a place where thousands of people are screaming your name. It's like playing, in the MLB every day or something, or NFL on a professional sports team. You're like basically a professional for a day. And so when that experience is over in terms of like the training, in terms of the focus, in terms of the attention you got that day, yeah, it's easy to feel like, gosh, what do I do? I feel a little bit lost now. I feel like I'm a little let down. It is a big letdown. It's a huge letdown. You just got off this massive project and this incredible day, with all these people screaming and yelling your name and being a rock star, to being like, oh, I guess it's back to work on Monday.
Yeah. And one thing that you can also do is you can buy a new bike. That might help. That helped me.
That's exactly right. Exactly. So we're wrapping this podcast. Like whatever you do, the key takeaway today, folks, is to go buy yourself a new hot pink bike. Yes. And that'll bring you happiness.
Retail therapy
Yes.
is always the best form of therapy. Do not quote us on that. That's not true. Go to real therapy. That's the other side. All right. Well, like you were saying, Jim, we are close on time. So I think let's save our insights on skipping and on group riding and on fatigue for next week or the week after that. We promise we'll hit them because they are important. But let's close it out with a challenge of the week and a gear pick of the week. But before we do that, I've got a shout out. So one of our loyal listeners is in charge of a foundation that does a lot of research and fundraising for MS. There's an MS ride, big bike ride at the Cape Cod Getaway. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes, but it's a really, really great option for folks if you're interested in a really well-supported group ride, a lot of fun. Seems like there's great food and great support and great hydration, all those things along the way. So we will put a link to that in the show notes, but please consider checking it out. And if you aren't interested in the ride, it's in late June. You can definitely donate. This is an incredible foundation that he's done some really great work for. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, put all your fitness towards something greater than yourself, right?
Exactly.
That's a cool idea, right? And I often have athletes ask me like, should I sign up for this kind of race or this kind of event? And my answer always like, yeah, do it. And especially for something like this, where it's like your money's going to some great foundation, like, yeah, do it, sign up.
Love it. Awesome. Okay, challenge of the week. I can go first. This is related to our thoughts on camps, but I'm going to challenge people to try 5x of one of your favorite disciplines or potentially your least favorite discipline in triathlon. So swim, bike, or run to see a training breakthrough. Jim, you've written a great blog post on this that we could probably link in the show notes as well. I think running is the one where I would just say, be smart with your mileage. Don't do anything crazy with running, but if you're on soft surfaces and keep your mileage relatively short, that consistency can be great. I think even better if you can say, hey, I'm going to get in the pool 5 times in a given week, you're going to come out of the pool being a whole lot faster. This is a challenge that I do not intend to do from a swimming perspective, but I've been doing a lot of biking recently. So 5x and you will level up.
I thought you were going to do 5x of golfing.
Yeah, actually, I think in my off season, I think let's not do the triathlons anymore. I'm actually going to pivot to golf, and maybe I can win that thing that Rory won.
The Tour de France, that Tour won out. Exactly. Yeah. Tour. I even said Tory. I don't even know his name. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So that's so much I know.
Your challenge of the week.
Okay. We got a bunch of haters out there, understandably. Okay. So my one it was actually related to an insight we'll talk about next time, but just go do intervals with friends or a group. But I'm just finding that I'm just getting much more, we have to talk about absolute power, drives adaptation and just, going out with a group, just do things harder, right? It's just natural to do things. So yeah, jump in, find a group, find a friend, go do something, go do intervals.
Awesome. All right, gear pick of the week. I have a fun techie one that I got as I think a birthday or Christmas present from the one and only Bruce Clayton. So shout out to Bruce on the podcast. It is the the Elevation Lab Tag Vault AirTag Bike Security Mount. So what is this thing? It's basically this little piece of plastic that holds an AirTag, and it goes behind one of your water bottle cages, pretty much flush against a bike. The key is that you can't see it, so you don't know that there's an AirTag integrated within your bike, but there is. And this is really helpful if your bike gets stolen, or if you leave it somewhere and you don't know where it is, or say if you're flying with it and you want to know where it is. Did your bike get sent to Dallas when you were going to, Vancouver or whatever you're supposed to do? That's all really helpful. So I keep an AirTag in my bike, and especially now that I am excited about my new hot pink fancy bike, I am very cognizant of not letting anything happen to it. So this is a great way to hide your AirTag in your bike.
That's a smart play. If you don't do that, the getaway was I just threw an AirTag in my bike bag. So at least I knew, like when I took off to go from Boston, so and so, I was like, okay, at least I know my bike is with me. Not that I can do anything about it. If you take off from Boston and it's still in Boston, there's not much you can really do about it. But you kind of know when you land, like, well, I may have to rent a bike. And in that case, actually, well, here's a little tip: is if you are traveling with your bike, take your pedals, your helmet, and your shoes with you on your carry-on, so that if your bike does get lost, you can show up at a bike rental place and you've got like your pedals and your helmet and your shoes with you.
That's such a good pro tip. That's so funny, Jim, because I remember growing up, like my parents would always say, like, put pajamas and a toothbrush in your carry-on just in case anything happens and you need to use your essentials. But it's actually like helmet, bike shoes, pedals. That's the only thing you need. Don't worry about the toothbrush. You can buy one of those. Just have your key stuff.
Right, we matured now. It's adult stuff. Yeah, adult thing. Okay, mine is it's sort of travel related, but it's so you probably have seen, if you look at bikes at all or follow bike racing or anything, and on Instagram, you will see that they're now inundated with advertisements of these small mini bike pumps that are rechargeable, and they're tiny and they pump up your bike. You can pump up a tire, I don't know, 90 seconds or 60 seconds or something. So anyway, I was gonna buy one of the fancy ones that are being advertised. I was being influenced by some pro cyclists. Turns out they were all sold out and they were $100. So I jumped on Amazon, read a bunch of reviews, and I found the one that was $33. And I said, wow, what the heck? Why not? Let's go for it. And I didn't want to bring a bike pump, traveling. So I bought this, I don't know how you sell it. It's a Veep tiny bike pump. I will put a link in here for Amazon. $33. Works fantastic. It's great. And I do not deflate my tires when I travel ever. So don't do that. And usually my tires are probably around 70 PSI. So anyway, they're really quick. It took like 5 seconds actually to just inflate my tires from like 70 to 78 or something. One warning is they are extremely loud. So if you do it inside, the first time you do it, they're very, very loud. So maybe you do it outside, but really is nice. And then I'm also going to keep it now in my bike bag, which I carry with me everywhere. So if I show up at a group ride, someone needs a pump, I can just pull a little thing out as opposed to taking a big bike pump with me everywhere. And yeah, so anyway, we're benefiting from all these new little bike pumps that are out there.
This is awesome. I feel like these were both good gear picks of the week, and we've been a little dry on gear picks of the week recently, but we still got it. It's cool. Episode 77 and still rolling.
This is a good one. I'm pretty excited about this one. I think I used it almost every day. And yeah, I went from like this huge, like, what do you do with the bike? Oh, and also because you can't also fly with CO2 canisters. So this has always been a problem for me. And I was like, well, I don't want to bring a bike pump, but then I get there and I don't really like hand pumps. I don't feel like I'm ever really effective with hand pumps and bike things. It's just really fun. It's a very awkward movement and they are good in a pinch. So anyway, this solves many problems.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. It is clear that we have a lot of insights that will power our next few episodes because we didn't even get to a handful of the key ones, but keep on listening and we will hit those. And of course, if there are topics that you want to hear about or questions you want answered, please send them in. We always drop a link to our feedback form in the show notes. So please feel free to send anything and we love to hear from you. And at the very least, consider dropping us a rating or a review if you haven't yet, or sharing the podcast with someone who might be interested in any of these topics.
All right. Keep golfing, peeps.